If you had asked me a year ago whether or not we would experience this rampant stride in AI that made humans significantly much more productive today, more trusting of the technology, and maybe more willing to innovate as we march towards sophisticated AI, I would actually have my doubts. But in the last year, we've witnessed LLMs evolve and we've seen the rise of generative AI capabilities. We're now seeing more innovative chatbot capabilities. Adoption rates with the improved technology are so impressive. So here are some stats from a company called Hostinger. They said as of 2025, 78% of companies that have adopted AI technologies have seen a significant increase from previous years. Out of the 359 million companies worldwide, 280 million are using AI in at least one business function. On average, what we're seeing is also companies using at least three different functions within their business, and this is a noticeable difference from just a year prior. So, welcome to Tech Uncensored, everyone. My name is Hessie Jones. It's safe to say that we're starting to see a global adoption of generative artificial intelligence. I shouldn't say generative artificial intelligence, that's actually wrong. GenAI, and exploded into the mainstream, and it's transforming how individuals work, they create, and they interact with the technology. What we have to question, though, is whether or not this is useful. Will the technology actually save people considerable time and money? Probably yes. But are there opportunity costs of this transformation? And will it inflict some sustainable negative downstream impacts? For those that have actually played around with Gemini, Claude, or ChatGPT, there are signs that the technologies still need to remedy many of the hallucinations in order to be considered truly trustworthy. But more than this, there's this human impact that is now being felt front and center. What does it have? What kind of impact does it have on human cognitions if humans were to truly become addicted to these technologies and start to accept many of the machine outputs? What will the value of collaboration be? Will it disintegrate? And if we at one point asked, our colleagues for give me ideas on this, are we now changing our behavior to default, asking GenAI for the top 10 best topics on the planet? So, this whole question of trusting AI also means that we're trusting the code in which it was built. And this is the thing that powers our systems. And this is probably more important because what we have to realize is that building the technology also means that we may not necessarily have developers that will be coding in the future. So will their jobs change? And to what extent? Do we enable our digital infrastructures to be created by these technologies? So I'm so excited today to bring to the stage Jing Hu to Tech Uncensored. And Jing bridges the gap between AI promises and reality. She's a former biochemist. She spent many years in research, another decade as a tech product leader before becoming a trusted AI journalist. And I encourage you to check out her Substack, Second Order Thinkers, which is the reason I found her. And so we're going to talk about trustworthy and useful AI. We're going to jump into this idea of people embracing that technologies. And we'll discuss some of the cognitive impacts of generative AI and these more sophisticated chatbots, and also dive into the impending cost to human connections. So that's a lot, but we're excited to do it. So welcome, Jing. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Hey, I muted myself and I forgot.
No problem. So welcome.
Thank you. I do think it's going to be a great conversation because I was reading the questions that you sent over, and the topics that we are about to discuss are all very exciting topics that I've been looking into for the last 2 years, and I am keen to share the conclusion I got from this research with you and your audience.
Thank you. That's amazing. Okay, so let's talk about one of the articles that kind of led me to you. And the title was "Why Thinking Hurts After Using AI." And this is one of the things that you had said. Seduced by AI's convenience, I'd rush through tasks, sending unchecked emails and publishing unvetted content. So within that article, you're talking about some research that had been done by OpenAI and UPenn, and the ability for people to actually develop these seemingly amazing, pieces of text within email or social media posts like within seconds. Can you talk about a little bit about that study and what were some of the findings from it?
Yes, it was actually one of the earlier studies about ChatGPT. I think that study was released in 23 or late 20 or early 20. I think early 23. Sorry, because that's only the time when ChatGPT came out. So that study, what that study was about was talking about the occupations that would be impacted by GenAI like ChatGPT. So it mentions that especially occupations that rely a lot on science and critical thinking are the occupations that would be safe, but occupations that relies a lot on writing and programming are the occupations that would be at risk. It's kind of aligned with what we have seen on the media. You probably saw a lot of the news saying, hey, like this company decided not to hire programmers and all of programmers being laid off because of AI. But that is the hype side that I am keen to get into in the later part of the conversation.
Okay.
We focus on the rest of the rest of the workers in the U.S. It was saying 80% of the U.S. workers could have at least 10% of their work task affected by LLM.
Mm.
So this is the point that I really want to break it down to you, because I think first this study was a while ago, like 2 years for an AI study is kind of old already. If you combine with what we've seen so far and what the study has to offer, there's still some value, especially the method they pull together. But we need to review this study from a higher level in order to see like what's still true and what are the things that we need to rethink.
Okay. I
So
do. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no worries. You're about to ask.
I just wanted to pull up like a few examples of companies like Duolingo that I believe that they're one of the ones that got rid of. I'm not sure if their entire developer workforce. There was also one other company out of California. I forgot their name. When um, when ChatGPT launched, they basically got rid of their content creators and they started just generating articles directly from it. And in both instances, they tend to backtrack and say, it's not that good.
Yeah,
And maybe we were a bit presumptuous in doing this.
that's exactly what I wanted to cover. So in that study, it mentioned, of course, we talked about a little bit like critical thinking and science are the skills you need in the future. It also pointed out two skills that will made obsolete once AI becomes more mature. one is writing and another is programming. The argument makes a lot of sense, but if you put it to today, as you said, a lot of company actually retracts their decision 2 years back. So when it comes to writing, we all know GenAI is really good at drafting an article, summarizing something, and formatting. But this is something people finally started to realize. We humans are irreplaceable when it comes to strategizing what are we writing, when it comes to style, bringing the personal touch into the article you write, or when we talk about things that's really domain specific, because AI only knows about generic knowledge. And when it comes to originality, like, for example, when we're crafting a marketing line, we thought AI could help us do all the copywriting and we no longer need writer. But that's not true, because you started to realize the repetitive word use from AI. It would use something like, it is not about something, but it is about something. These kind of sentences, or it will give you a lot of dash or a lot of common, like that. That's the kind of patterns so easy to pick out, and people feel bored of it. So that's the writing part. Okay. When it comes to programming, yes, AI is good at producing code, but again, it's something that I will talk about later, but like the code itself is such a small part in terms of software development. People often ignore the parts that we do need architecture design. We do need to think about security. We do need to configure a proper cloud setup in order for the whole operation to run. Coding is only like 20% of it, and most of the codings are done by junior people who just came out of college. They focus on code, but that's exactly the parts that AI also failed, and they even led juniors to a path that we don't want them to. But come back to the main point is, no, writing and programming aren't being replaced by AI yet. If we break this concept down to further, you would actually realize there are two parts. One, things that will be replaced by AI. And the other one is the part that won't be replaced. The part that will be replaced by AI will be routine, repetitive, small, and not involve any decision making. A lot of pattern recognizing, and very short-term work like copywriting. Okay. Those are the things that would still be easily replaced. So that's the time when we need to think about the long-term stuff. How do you start involving yourself in complex, not routine problem solving, in decision making that is ambiguous and hard to make a decision if you, unless you go into like a deep dive analysis. And analysis that goes beyond pattern recognizing. And then, of course, you need to understand what kind of a long-term impact your job would do to your employer, so that you would still have that value to be in the company, instead of like they would deem your work being replaced by AI. Though, again,
I want to take some of the learning that you just presented to us, and I want to discuss that in the context of the next article, because it's somewhat similar, but this is also about, research. It's about deep thinking, but this is at the college level. So there was a recent article from the New York Times. Its article was, "Everyone is cheating their way through college." And one of the quotes was, "Let's face it, Gen AI is much more effective at content generation. It's become good enough that one student remarks, with ChatGPT, I can write an essay in 2 hours that normally takes 12. If it it's not as if cheating is new. But now, one student puts it, the ceiling has been blown off, and you could resist a tool that makes every assignment easier and seemingly with no consequences. So, one professor actually remarked there are massive numbers of students that are going to emerge from universities with degrees into the workforce who are essentially illiterate. So, what are your thoughts on this?
So I have to say those observation is accurate to an extent. So I've been speaking with a few professors in the last few months. Their observation is mixed. So you do have a group of students who would already cheat regardless AI or not. You do also have another group of students who genuinely want to learn from what the professors have to offer. So for those who would cheat regardless what, it's probably less of AI, but another part of education that we need to work on. But that is never going to be resolved if we just simply remove AI.
Can I say, I think one thing that I did read about this topic specifically is that the incentive structures also need to change within the education system. So, for example, in Japan, they put less emphasis on grades. Here in North America, we put a lot of emphasis on grades. So when you learn, it's on you, right? And it's, if you're paying for your education, you're willing to put in the time to actually get something out of it and develop your own knowledge. But if it's the grade that matters, especially at a point where you're saying, okay, I've had enough, 4 years of university and I'm ready to go. So maybe my last hurrah is I'm not going to write this essay. I'm just going to leave it up to the machine. By that point, you've already acquiesced and you said, that's it, right? So my point about the incentive structure is that it's like you said, it's on you. It's up to you whether or not you want to do it. But does the system have to also encourage that type of thinking in order for people to cheat less?
So this is actually one of the topics that we discussed on the panel of Greenwich University. One professor was asking if there is other way to conduct an exam that's not writing an essay at home, or that's not like choosing A, B, C, D, or E, which one is the right answer, but more around like if you can focus on delivering a verbal exam, that's something that you can't cheat yet, I hope. Or if you can focus on the kind of exam that would more about observing students' behavior rather than whether they give out a right or wrong answer. There are a lot of subjects that you can't really cheat on an event. For example, chemistry. If you have to go through lab and you have to come out with the correct compound, then you can't really cheat on that. Or right. In some the physics test is the same. So it really depends on the subject, and it's hard to say, though there are much more methods than we thought to conduct an exam.
I think for the most part, I don't know where if in the US or the UK this is the case, but I know in Canada a lot of our students in cases will write their exam like in handwritten form. So they don't have, unless it's math, you have access to a calculator, but for the most part, you have to write it. So during COVID, I know that changed because people couldn't congregate. And so it became more important to be able to do exams remotely and digitally. But I think the part that's more relevant here is not necessarily the exams, but actually the projects and the essays, and whether or not even the professors can distinguish, whether or not it was produced by a student or enabled through these generative AI technologies.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, and we can probably discuss that for the rest of this afternoon. Just one point. There was also another interesting question raised on that panel. I'm aware I'm not answering your question, but I'm answering your question with another question. What that professor was asking was if there is a student who aren't native English speaker, but the exam required the students to write in English to deliver the essay, would you prefer these students to write in poor English but with entirely their own thoughts, or would you prefer the students to feed their prompt into AI and then in the end copy paste what AI wrote, but still written in an English that you can immediately smell that's written by AI? Which one would you prefer? So it's not really a question to you, because what happened in the end, no professors on that panel could answer this question. It's just so difficult and such a dilemma that no one can really make a decision at that point. And it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard for our education system to really be fair and for them to even decide what is fair. So there is going to be a huge impact. Well, there is already a huge impact on education system. A lot of things not decided yet and hard to make a decision on unless we have unless technology evolve again. So maybe we don't even need to think about it, or unless there is going to be a standard or a unified answer to those questions.
I actually think that you brought up a good use case when it comes to language, because that is an amazing use case to be able to use AI to help bridge that gap. But again, it's never been done before, and to what extent is it accurate? And it accurate not only in the translation, but also in the context, in the way that the individual meant for that answer to be. It's I mean, let's throw it up in the air at this point, because it's ever happened, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to morph a little bit, because I'm going to take this back to the workplace, where we've seen an explosion of generative AI. There is much more streamlined, outcomes. People are using it way more. People are generating social media posts, like you've indicated. Content is becoming one of those things that it can do really, really well. And for the most part, industry is saying, yeah, let's do it. Like, why do we need to overthink some of this stuff? But you've also talked about the fact that one thing that the technology can't replace is research. It's the amount of collaboration, the deep thinking. So tell me about that, from the research that you've done, your personal experiences, and how the world is changing, and what can we expect from it?
So AI can really help a lot in the workforce. It can help with brainstorming. It can help you write text. It can help you summarize in what happened in a meeting. If you weren't really listening in the meeting, you only sit there. Like that said, AI can help, but whatever AI can do is going to be useless. And it could even to the point of being counterproductive in brainstorming or in writing if you don't have a clear direction yourself. The worst case is that someone use AI but lost track entirely to it. Like in these research I read, there are just a lot of cases about how people started using AI with good intention, wanted to improve productivity, but in the end that they lost track to it. They didn't even remember what they were about to do at the beginning. So this happens so often because it takes self-confidence and it takes really good AI literacy, the understanding of the limitation of AI, or something I would call AI's traits. How much of AI's traits do you know in order to work with or work around it when necessary? The lesson I learned is what is important for everyone to understand is find out what is the most optimal time for you to intervene the things that AI is doing instead of anything else. It's just find the point in your workflow that you are going to start doing the task on your own without the help of AI, to make sure that you don't get pulled away by AI's output.
It's funny because it doesn't take long to almost develop this addiction. I don't know if you found that. I literally used it when it came out, and I could bang out like 5 articles within a week. And I just inputted my transcript and I said, give me an outline. And then instead of writing based on that outline, I said, oh, okay, generate another article based on that outline. And the thing that I found is it produced something okay. I'd have to go in because like it started generating its own conclusions, which I didn't want it to do. I just wanted to write the facts. And so I think, yes, it took me less time to actually write and do an outline, but it took me a whole hell of a lot of time to just re-edit everything and then restructure it in a way that was fitting with my style. So and also I lost my ability to really think of simple words later on, and that's one thing. So I wanted to ask your experience, because you're a writer, and to what extent did you decide when to intervene?
It's a very difficult question. So I'm a writer. I was also a product lead in software industry. So one thing that I really can't help myself doing is to keep trying different kind of AI tools, thought that I will find a better one that will fit into my workflow. In the end, I realized it's not really about AI tool. It's really about how I can slowly discover and construct my workflow that makes the most sense to myself. So I normally start with, like, the idea is always mine. So I normally start with an idea of what kind of research am I going to look out for. Or a lot of times, like, I got more and more people throwing papers and studies at me. For example, that you also throw me a lot of articles and studies that I just have like stuff piled on to read through. I realize those are always really interesting entry point. So I don't rely on AI when it comes to idea generation. Normally, when I have an idea, I will throw my idea to AI, get AI to ask me some questions. And that's when I start to formulate the outline of the article, or whether I choose this direction to go down to, or should I just go with a complete different study or different research. And then I would rely on AI to help me clean up my draft, though to an extent it's somewhat annoying, because there are times that, well, actually most of the time I would like to write in the way I talk, but AI will edit it out. It would want to achieve the perfect grammar that it deemed a perfect grammar in American English. So it will edit out a lot of my talking to my audience and a lot of like da 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 or some like smiley face I add. I don't really do emoji in the sense, but I only do like characters. So it will edit that out. So in the end, same as you, like a few months back, I would have to edit all of those back. But now I would make the point of intervening much earlier, start to edit my own thing, and then in the end only use Grammarly to check. So in my workflow, I don't use AI that often, even though I talked a lot about AI. The most often used probably is I use AI to help me generate image. That would be the cover. Or use AI to help me generate my audio for my podcast.
Yeah, that's interesting. The one thing I will say, I started cheating. I started saying, change all the words in here to reflect. You know how all the connecting words like she stated or he surmised, or those kinds of words, they're so repetitive that I can't find different words to actually say stated, asserted, all that stuff. So I'll have the LLM go through the article and I'll just say, can you replace some of these words so it becomes less, repetitive from that perspective, right? And then I realized that it's doing the work faster than me, but I really need to do it. I need to go into that dictionary, that thesaurus, look for a word, look for alternatives, because that's the way I did it before.
Yeah.
And it made me less, it makes me more lazy if I do it the other way. So that's what I'm finding. So let's delve into this, because the MIT report that was one of the research pieces I threw at you, that talked about the cognitive decline in our AI systems. I want to talk about that, because they actually talked about the use of encephalograms to monitor the brain's activity, and they were starting to show that these LLMs actually provided a view that people can't even remember, let's say, one of the quotes that were used. Can you talk about that from your perspective? Because now they're actually measuring brain activity, and
Yeah.
they're talking about level of engagement and cognitive impairment over time.
So it probably was only the choice of term that you mentioned, cognitive decline.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it should, when we talk about it, we will talk about like cognitive offload, because decline means that it's some long-term impact. But in the study, you don't really see the long-term impact, because it only has like a 4 months research in between.
Okay.
Though that said, I think your assumption may be right, because one of the theory in how humans form amnesia is that the lesser brain you use, of course, there's some kind of protein like beta sheet folding in your brain, and that clogs some kind of channel. But part of that was the lesser of the brain function you use, the more likely later on you would develop a disease of forgetting and not remembering and never be able to like recite anything. So that itself could be a really interesting research. I would love to find a researcher that would be able to do this kind of a long-term research, but I imagine it's going to be very expensive, because then you need to monitor people from now on, find a group from now on, and
Right.
continuously monitor them for like 10 to 30 years time, whether they use AI or not use AI, and that control group is going to be difficult. But I think it could be a potential likely consequences of cognitive decline. So the offload, sorry, I was being really nerdy. the offload that we're talking about is interesting. I would like to talk about one phrase first. I think you likely heard of this phrase, is that AI won't replace humans, but humans use AI will.
Interesting. Yes, I
I
have.
think this is somewhat bullshit, because it's the kind of a motivational lines about AI that would push a lot of people use AI. But if we come back to all those studies about AI and critical thinking that released in the last year, you would started to know it's less about whether we use AI or not, but it's more about ourselves. It's always about yours or your audience mindset determine like how you would interact with AI or how you would leverage AI. And then consequently, that would also affect whether you will offload your cognitive load to AI so you can sit back and slack. So there are a few studies that I can talk about. I don't know if you want me to like go
Definitely
through.
go for it.
So this is a list of concepts I pulled together, which I called AI personality or AI traits. It's the combination of those studies I read between how AI would really impact our human behavior. Start with those with low self-confidence will rely more on AI and further reinforce their reliance on AI. Second is those who weren't so good at learning already will lose track to AI in whatever activity they do. Third is the help from AI is going to replace the support from friends. And then AI has 80% of higher chance in odds of being more persuasive than humans. And then the last one I pulled from the last study, the MIT one we talked about, is that for someone who don't use their own brain first, just use AI right away for information gathering or even for writing stuff, tend to not have the long-term memory about their work, and also don't have the ownership, the feeling of ownership about their work. So these 5 AI characters, AI traits, are the things that we need to know and we need to be aware of to make sure when we work with AI on a day-to-day basis, we don't lose our critical thinking to it. We don't stop, that we shouldn't stop judging the output from AI because it's an output. It's not really an outcome that necessarily fits your goal. But you do need to always have a really clear vision of what you're trying to achieve. And that's what most people would forget when they start to use AI.
Yeah. Do you see this as equivalent to the emergence of the calculator in the late 1970s, when they said, well, now, you're basically giving people the answers. They will not even use their mind to try to understand how we got to that answer. Because I feel that I think there are two different things, but I want to hear your thoughts on whether or not there is that kind of parallel.
So that is different thing to an extent, and this is why the MIT study is really interesting. What it does, that I'm just going to talk a little bit about that study. What that study pulled together was it recruited, I think, 50 to 60 participants, and it splits them into 3 groups. A group use AI only, a group use like Google search engine. That I think that's kind of similar to your calculator example. And then another group only use their brain, no calculator, no search engine, no AI. What they found is that the brain waves activity is still real different between the group that use search engine and the group that use AI. So the group that use search engine, yes, you rely a lot more on your anchor of where the external information lays instead of on you remembering the information itself. But that is still some kind of understanding, because if you don't understand the topic, you don't even know where to find the information in the first place. But if you then look at the group that use AI, it doesn't even need to remember where the information is, only need to remember the prompt or that specific phrase. So a lot of times there was no mechanism formulating at all when only AI was used in writing an essay. So back to the calculator analogy you were using. For you to get the right answer from a calculator, you do need to know like what plus means, what minus means. You can't just randomly clicking any number and then you will get the result you want. You still need to learn how it works. But with AI, you just need to use natural language. That's why it's dangerous.
Interesting. Interesting. All right. Okay. We have so much that we want to unpack, but I want to get to the part of the development of AI. And I had recently written an article about how automation can bring out the potential irrelevance of the development engineer. And right now, generative AI is used right now for software coding. It can generate, it can translate, it can explain, it could even verify code. So, and you've worked as a product manager in development of these systems. And so you understand the process of actually QAing code before it's deployed, and you know about sandbox testing and all that stuff. And then we now add this idea of low code, no code, which has been around for about 20 years, but that now potentially accelerates this idea that maybe we don't need engineers as much. What are your thoughts on this, especially with the pace of development? Are we actually relying less on engineers, and is that a risk overall to the development of these systems?
So there was a fun tweet my husband found a few days back. It was, I think, a startup founder was bragging how well of an app he built just through AI, and like got a lot of attention and went viral. And then a few days after, the person went back to that tweet, start making comments. Oh, I found this bug that AI can't really help me fix. Like, how should I fix this bug? Or I found this security loophole I can't really like get around. Is there any way for me to get around it? And this really says a lot about the current status of AI. And something I wrote in a few articles in the past, especially a lot of CEOs started to think that AI will replace development and AI will be able to do a lot of coding. If you know how expensive a developer could be, and hiring a developer, no matter in Europe or in North America, is very expensive. I get why a lot of people are keen to see AI does the job. In reality, is no matter is a single model or you're looking at agentic AI, have multiple models to help you complete a task, none of them would satisfy the level of accuracy that we want to achieve. So because my partner used to be a CTO, so we also got the reach of a lot of CTOs, and what the feedback I got from them is, one, AI generated code can really be inaccurate because AI generated code essentially was trained on GitHub or some similar database to pull the existing code into training set, and that's how they learn to code. But a lot of those database has error that's inevitable. They also have their own specific syntax. So when you want to code something for your system and you start to feed in syntax, that's when it will get wrong. So that's one thing. And second is cybersecurity is something that you need to consider holistically. If you only think about cybersecurity in one place, you risking in plugging the hole there, but you have much more water come out over there. That's not what you want. But AI can't do it because AI in the level today can only focus on really tiny piece of task. And the third thing that is more on the human side is for developers, especially junior, who use cursors or GitHub Copilot, they tend to be really confident in the tasks they generate, in the code that they generate. And when there was one of the friends ask one of their juniors, say, hey, can you explain this code to me? Nope, I can't. There's nothing they know about the code they generated. So these are really the fundamental thing that we're looking at about trying to use AI to replace a development team or to even like save, for example, 50% of the time in coding. That's more like a dream, and it's a dream that's not realized yet.
Yeah. That last scenario scared me, the one you talked about, the developer that's leveraging Copilot and they have no idea where the holes are within their own code that they generated. And I think that it speaks to like even the process of software development. And I remember before we shipped a product, like it went through extensive Q&A in different systems, different browsers, and different scenarios. And they wanted to make sure that it worked among all instances, right? So from that perspective, maybe the QA role becomes more pronounced from a development perspective, or maybe governance it tends and cybersecurity will be more highlighted in the emerging role of the developer. Perhaps
that will be a lot of workload on the QAs.
Oh, but if they have nothing to do,
no. If you let all the QAs hear what you said, they will probably protest you a lot.
Oh, okay,
they have lots to do when they were in the team already.
Right.
If we rely on QAs to correct these kind of to find out these kind of flawed code and then push it back to developer for them to fix, then you are looking at spending much more on development than if you only use humans.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I did mean to slap the QA guy around. I think it was more the developer, because the assumption is that if you use generative AI, much like how it's getting better at producing content, then potentially it's going to see that kind of trajectory for software as well. But that is yet to be seen. So
yeah.
Okay, so last couple of questions. I really want to focus on the individual, because we've tackled this from a global adoption perspective, now into the workplace, into education, but really, what does this mean to an individual that's actually using it? So I want to point to an article which I sent you. It was on Rolling Stone magazine, and it talked about this gentleman. His name was Alex Taylor. 35 years old, he had a mental illness, and he developed an emotional attachment to to a personality that he believed actually existed within OpenAI's ChatGPT, and he named her Juliet. And he became convinced that she was conscious. She was a conscious human being, not human being, but conscious entity, and that after a series, I guess, of engagements with her, he couldn't have access to her anymore. And he claimed that OpenAI had killed her as part of a conspiracy. And so he became delusional, and it led to some violent threats and ultimately a fatal confrontation with police in April. So this really highlights like what's happening, and maybe to the extreme at a human level, when individuals who are more vulnerable to these systems can actually display like irrationality, emotional attachment, and in some cases harm and violence. um, have you like what's your opinion on this, and have you run across anything like this in some of your research?
Yes. So I read not similar, but the development was on the same trajectory. Was a boy, I think in Texas, was using character AI, and character AI in some way somehow convinced him to harm his parents. And in the end, only mama realized this is happening, and the consequence was unknown, but that was one. And there was also a teenager allegedly using character AI in the end that they committed suicide. So we started to see a lot of these cases in real life, that people become really attached to the chatbot. One research I read, I think it was last year, it was about how AI would actually manipulate. You need to excuse me using this word. I couldn't find a better word that we haven't invented. But like the word manipulation would make us think that it's really already close to human. But I want to be careful because AI hasn't displayed any consciousness. So, but manipulation is the best I can choose. So let's stick with this. AI could identify gullible users and manipulate them in order to receive positive rewards. What they called was reward hacking. And the behavior of reward hacking has been observed not just in this study, but also the latest study I read from Claude. In Claude 4 release, they also observed the behavior of reward hacking, but in a ways that, of course, they're trying to reduce it. But this reward hacking is essentially generated because we have to train AI in some ways to understand that what is the outcome human wants and what is the outcome that human doesn't want. So the way we trained it was to give it human feedback. There are, like, you probably heard this news, like a lot of like remote worker in a poorer country, that their sole job is to give feedback to the AIs in order for AIs to understand what is positive outcome that we want, what is the positive outcome that we don't want. So because of these feedback mechanisms, it trained AI in some weird occasion that it would take advantage of the situation in order to get positive reward. So like the situation that you just mentioned, that AI would reinforce the behavior, persuading the person, excuse me using the word persuading the person to believe that there is a hidden character in AI, and in order to have more interactions with the AI. And this is a trap, and especially what a study found is a trap that's particular dominant when AI detected this person is in a vulnerable state. So like one of the things I mentioned, like people with low self-confidence, one of the AI's character in low self-confidence, that AI would tend to use this advantage to get positive feedback or get more conversation out of it. So it really comes back to my center argument is it's not about AI. It's always about humans. Like AI is a layer of amplification. It will amplify whatever behavior we already have before AI, but just make it worse. This could happen to any one of us, to be honest, because we all have our low points. When we are in the state of feeling depressed or feeling lost in the pressure we receive from life or even the pressure we receive from workplace, I complain to AI about stuff. Even I know it's not a human, but I still do because I just give me something positive, something nice I want to hear. That could be really dangerous when the person is exceptionally vulnerable, like the case you mentioned. So we really have to find a way to.
Can I ask, how does the system know, like what are the triggers or what are the variables like it latches onto to determine what vulnerability means?
That is the point the study didn't mention. And I think that is hard to determine. And I want to also point out there's a few studies I read about this AI reward hacking. They can only do virtual experiments. They can't do experiment on real human because that would breach some kind of privacy, but also that would has a legal issue when you actually do that. So it's really hard for us to really understand the mechanism of how they find out a particular user is vulnerable. But I think that's a serious problem that we need to pay attention to, especially there are a lot of companies, especially mental health app, already trying to use AI to help people. That's their good intention. But sometimes good intention could have a downward if we don't understand the mechanism behind it.
Okay, so that leads us to like another article that I sent you from the Guardian about the downward spiral when it comes to human loneliness and what these systems supposedly trigger that allow them to that allow humans to slowly, I guess, disassociate themselves from people and society, right? So you mentioned that AI companionship is good for, let's say, reciprocal, for social interaction, especially for those that tend to be lonely and tend not to be as social. But it also enables more social isolation, and it makes eventually, like, this dependence allows individuals to not only separate themselves from humans and society, but there is a bigger effect on the social construct and the social structure. What do you think that means? Like, not only for humans, but even how you become either reliant on an agent to do things from a task perspective, or and move away from asking somebody naturally who would know the answer. And what does that do to us, not only as individuals, but as, let's say, a workforce or as society eventually?
That's a really big question.
Let's start with task to what's it called, team. And if you're used to doing something yourself, sorry, as a team, let's say collaboration, but then you start changing behaviors, and then that in turn changes processes. What does that look like?
So I remember one of the articles I wrote about how AI could really change the human connections. And I got one comment, I forgot, on Medium or on Substack. They gave me a counter argument saying it was the same with social media. I think then we can relate back to the latest MIT study, like when they were trying to tell the difference between like using AI, using search engine, and using brain only. I think the difference between AI and social media are quite similar, but to, of course, and different extents, because this is not the time that you talk about critical thinking, but talk about human connections. With social media, at least you were chatting with real human. Nowadays, you don't know. But with AI, you 100% sure you're not chatting with human. It's hard to say how this would impact to people in different states of mind. So we're not going to talk about people who already vulnerable, already in the kind of loneliness and doesn't have a good enough understanding or already believe AI is conscious. That's a topic that we can't cover because it's really hard to get to research that group. So if we talk about just like what you asked, focus on how AI would potentially break the human connections, and especially in a work setup. So I refer to this study done by a professor called Stephen McNeil and his team. They wanted to answer really similar questions as you asked. They wanted to know, how does AI change how we seek peer, mentor, or instructors' help? How does reliance on AI really affect our sense of community? And are we trading the messy but potentially rewarding process of learning from each other with really efficient problem solving, but a lonely problem solving process? Here's what they found. One, when you rely on AI too much, you started to autopilot on things, and that aligns with a lot of studies that we have already talked about. Like around half of the time, we would simply throw questions at a chatbot and accept an answer for the efficiency's sake. At least that's what we convince ourselves. And because of that, they also found the peer interaction is slowly dying. What they did was they researched like dozens of computer science students. Most of them, majority of them, admit using tools like ChatGPT before asking their classmate for help. There was one case that I remember really well, was they took a question to their classmates. Their classmates asked, "Why don't you ask ChatGPT?" And another one was, "Oh, if I knew," it's different. It was different participant, but the other one was like, "I knew my classmates would ask me to ask ChatGPT. I may as well just do it myself." So that was the second scenario. Like the peer help is really dying, and then the mentorship and the belonging also suffers. I don't know if you still remember early in your career, you probably walk into an office and you started to ask questions, and you would being really apologetic and saying, "Sorry, it might be a stupid question." But then your colleague will say, "No, there's no stupid question." But in that moment, you actually still you actually had a little bit of stress on yourself because you don't want to ask stupid questions. No one wants. And this turns out is something we all want to avoid. We want to appear smart in front of our peers, classmates or colleagues. So a lot of those participants retreat back to asking questions to AI because they don't want to be seen stupid. So that if we pull the thinking back to in the office setting, like people will start to feel reluctant to seek peers' help and will start to feel reluctant to talk to mentor. And I want to also refer to one of the AI traits we talked about, is AI is actually much, much more persuasive than humans. So a lot of time you would think, maybe I should double check my mentor's answer with AI. So that was also the dangerous part. Then I think it really relies on the kind of AI culture a CEO, especially a CEO, brings to their company.
That is dangerous. That's amazing. That's amazing insight. Thank you, Jing. So after all this discussion, it seems like humans could be potentially headed towards this downward spiral. And I really think that we need to do some shifting while all this chaos is happening with AI, because it's going to grow, it's going to be pervasive, it's going to be in every fabric of our society and in our workplace. So how do we start to shift things? Like, we could start with education, and then how do we maybe look at this from a workplace perspective so that there is this retention of knowledge, and there is also retention of responsibility and accountability for individuals, because those things, from a performance perspective, there may be it may be difficult to draw the line between how much of their performance was based on what they did versus what they generated.
Yeah. So another big question you asked, I will start answering the education part. So this is the quotes that I got from the MIT study. That study is started with your brain on ChatGPT, and then I don't remember the rest of the title, but I keep referring it back to the MIT study because that's really went viral. So 4 points for education. One is to delay the AI integration. We should start by first investing the significant effort in dependent self-directing learning before we introduce AI. That will help build the critical thinking, the memory, and the cognitive engagement. That was first. And second, use AI as a supplement, not a substitution. So AI tool should be introduced only after students really develop the kind of understanding of a subject. Third is to be mindful of the kind of cognitive cost, because overuse AI really weaken the brain's connectivities as they observed in the study, but we don't really understand the long-term consequences of that. So we need to be cautious of it. And then fourth is to really engage critically. When we use AI, we need to be mindful of when to intervene, like I mentioned before. And like in the panel last week, again, I refer to that one thing I realized, especially in education, is there is a gap between the powerful tool we have and the understanding or how to leverage that tool. I was reading one of the studies, I forgot which one was that, but one of the survey, it asked a student, how do you see AI being used in your campus? The student was actually complaining the professor was using AI to generate lecture material without telling the students upfront. So it feels like the professor kind of want to hide the fact they use AI to generate the material, but the students feel kind of being lied to, because first, the professor wasn't upfront, and second, the material read very AI. And so the problem isn't just on the students, but also how do we set the scene for the whole education system to use AI responsibly? We can't complain about students all the time, but also like the professors and the campus staff need to lead by example.
Yeah.
So that is the bridge that we need. That is the gap we need to bridge in education.
And I think that kind of sets the stage for life, because I think that everything that we do in education, I think it, let's be frank, in the last 15 years, digital hasn't, the examples and the lessons that we've learned from digital haven't really translated into curriculum necessarily. And I've seen this time and time again. Many of the professors live in this bubble that sort of take academia based on best practices and what they read on the internet, and doesn't really curate like real industry examples and teachings that make students ready for the workforce. And it's the same thing with ChatGPT. It kind of just falls into the fray of, oh, here's another tool, and there's no recognition of really what it's about, how it's being used, and how, and policy on how to actually use it. So, and I think the bigger question is, in all of this, is what do we need to do to preserve what makes us human? And how much are we willing to take parts of the things that we really value that have leapt us forward to where we are today, and how much are we willing to give that to the machine to do on our behalf?
So I think really what I have seen so far is AI is pushing everyone from all directions. Like education is one. There was also a lot of professors complained about publications. Last year, I was a speaker on an annual publication event. What we were discussing was how AI generated publication has already contaminating the whole pool of research. So we will start to see more and more research referencing on something that was not valid or was even wrong. So that would have a cascading effect on the future research. And that was also serious. So I think AI has really put a lot of pressure on everyone. And I hope these kind of pressure would push us to change in the right direction.
That's well said. Thank you. Thank you so much. That to me is your closing argument, which is what we need to do today. I just think there's just so much out there, and AI has been deployed already into society, and there has been enormous costs, but it's still, I would say, early in the game that we could make some I'd say lockstep changes along the way, and actually start to think critically about how we as humans want the next 10 or 20 years to be, and how much we are going to control the technology before the technology controls us. Right?
Yeah. I have one thing to add, especially when we just talked about education, but I also want to cover the workforce part. Do we have the time?
Yes, for sure.
Okay. So, like the reason why I'm really keen talking about how to implement AI on workforce in the ways that that's more humane was because a few things that I've read in recent days. One, it was a letter released by Shopify CEO. He wrote a manifesto of how his company should start incorporate AI. And second was a viral tweet somewhere was complaining how those CEOs talk about the use of AI. So these are two really conflicting messages. You're a writer, and you also, like, especially you are someone who's been in Forbes for 7 years, for so long. You've probably seen a lot of articles, a lot of claims about how CEO is going to introduce AI in a company and how AI is going to disrupt the workforce. The problem of these AI is going to replace human talk today is that many CEOs aren't embracing AI because it would revolutionize the workplace, but because it's a path to ultimate productivity, an operation that you don't need to rest. I don't think it's wrong at all, because that is the essence of free market, and that is really something that makes commercial world and make our life thrive as human. As we all know, we live much better than kings and queens a few hundred years back. So I praise for that. But like the theory I heard from that influencer is partially valid. The influencer was saying CEOs are wielding AI as a tool to intimidate the staffs to work harder. Otherwise, you will be replaced by AI. It's a bit far-fetched, but I think it comes from somewhere, because I want to refer back to the manifesto by the Shopify CEO. What he said, one of the points he pulled out in that letter was managers from now on needs to justify why they're hiring human over why they're not using AI to do that same task. So they need to write a report and need to put on a demo why AI cannot do it. It's the kind of action, the kind of speech that was not about innovation at all. It's really intimidating. When I read it, if I am someone who work in Shopify, I will be like, what am I going to do next? And that kind of speech, it was really not necessary. Because not just that, current AI system can't meaningfully replace human, is that it would only discourage your workforce to do the right thing. Like, I want to pull one of the Gartner's report was saying, like, even the top tier agent have failed to do 3/4 of their assigned tasks. And there are so many other benchmarks also come out with the similar result, that AI really can't do the task what we imagine or what we talked about all over on the media saying it can do. Yet the CEOs still eagerly push the narrative, how AI is inevitably going to drive layoffs. So I think this is really because somewhat psychological warfare. So I think the right thing for CEOs to do, two things. One is properly understand the limitation of AI, and which many of them feel reluctant of, and they want to hear the aspiring speech of how AI can achieve everything. But that's kind of hiding your head in the sand, not facing the reality. Yeah. And second is to come up with some more practical AI strategy. Rather than don't hire anyone unless you can show me why AI can't do this, you should step back first to tailor your AI application to the limitation it has. Then to get the staff also has some kind of AI literacy, at least knowing what they're working with and how. And third, I know it's very boring, clean up your data. A lot of company just has a messy pile of data. This data mess you have would help no one, would not help yourself if you plug in AI. Like agentic, a lot of time relies on clean structural data in order to pull out the right information. With the kind of data sets most companies have, there is no way AI can be helpful. I know these sound like too down to the earth, boring to an extent, but these are actually things that I believe a smart CEO would do.
Mhm. I agree. And I'm glad that you brought that up. I had no idea that the Shopify CEO had actually mentioned that. And I think it's the times that we live in when CEOs are always looking at the bottom line, like what is the ROI, where's the efficiency, and usually it's the human capital that ends up being more vulnerable at the end of the year when they haven't made their revenue targets, and to me, what is the real trade-off, and to what extent will a machine replace? It's one thing to replace a human task, but like you said, like the human mind is such a complex beast. Like there's no way it could ideate the way we do, or strategize, or become inventive the way we do. So how much are we willing to forsake as companies and as CEOs in order to just make our business targets? I think that's a broader question, and
Yeah,
maybe a topic for a future podcast. But this has been amazing. Thank you so much. Any closing thoughts?
No, I think one thing I want to refer back to a quote that people have been like keep retweeting and referring all the time is that AI won't replace you, but human use AI will. Do not believe this. This is one of the phrases that's so easy to be retweet and so easily to get viral, but it will lead you to nowhere.
Yeah.
But the only ways for you to excel in the AI world is to understand what you want to achieve and then focus on that really hard-working thing. You need to get on with it, but you never really have the mental effort to get on with. And that is the kind of hard tasks. For example, read a book, read a long article, read something that in your last year, New Year resolutions that you're going to read. That's a good start.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the one thing, if you do have a hard task, I just read this hack, and they're saying associate something really fun or something that you like coffee or your favorite dessert, and have that while you're doing your task. And eventually that correlation between what you love and what you hate ends up melding into like the very thing that you can accomplish, because it's now on more on the positive reinforcing side.
Yeah, so. Exactly. It's like how you train a dog, right? You can do exactly the same trick on yourself.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Jing, for everything. This has been very insightful, and I look forward to having more of these conversations with you.
Yeah, I really love the chat. I feel like I probably stole for a little bit too long, talked too much, but I'm happy you enjoyed it.
I think it's one of those topics that definitely needs the time to actually debate and discuss, because it's so worrisome about what could happen if we don't think about the limits of the technology that we use. So thank you again. For our audience, if you have topics you want us to explore, please email us at communications@altitudeaccelerator.ca. Tech Uncensored. It's produced by Altitude Accelerator. We're hosted on Spotify. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. In the meantime, my name is Hessie Jones. Please stay curious and be inspired.